I really wish spring would hurry up and come back. We keep getting really weird weather here. It'll be 60 degrees one day, but rain, and then the sun will pop out and it'll be 30 degrees or 35 degrees the next day. Been a while since I've been able to really get out and enjoy Go Man Go here, so spring, please come save me. Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Speedy's Garage. We're gonna talk some more about the shop build this week, and as always, we're gonna start off by answering the questions from the last episode. So the last one was on electrical. I took a little bit of a break last week. I'll link to that to the top. I did a tool review. I like a little bit of variety when I go to a YouTube channel, and so when I shoot for this YouTube channel, I like to use a little bit of variety there too. But we will continue to consistently talk about the shop build. We've got still quite a bit to go. Start off with the questions and comments. Let's see, Fried Electronics says, great video series, thank you. And he goes, I know there's probably quite a few people out there now that are inspired from the series. Well, I hope so. That's why I am shooting it so that people can kind of learn and kind of see what's involved in building one of these. Had there been something like this, or had I found something like this when I was building my shop, I would have been all over it. And he says, hey, sort of an off-topic question. What is your electricity rate? Well, I looked it up and it was 8.77 cents per kilowatt hour is actually what it shows on this area's electrical. I know that's typically pretty good. So Jet Tech says, great job as always. Thank you, sir. Frank Lyle, who's been following along, he says, I will add that I run my own branch switch wiring, and I have an electrician who is a friend, you're lucky, swing by and inspect, double check everything, and he does that service for a beer or two, even better. And he says the device outside that controls the lighting is a photo cell. Got it. We use them all the time in conjunction with programmable time lock for lot lighting control at the dealerships. Cool, good to know. It's kind of a goofy looking thing though, isn't it? It looks like a little Martian robot or something. Now they have programmable switches, and that's what I actually used in the house for the eave lights and whatnot. And if I could have found a 5-gang or 6-gang wall panel that had a square cutout on one end in stainless steel for one of those switches that's programmable and has the computer inside to control the lights, that's what I'll eventually switch to. Weekend Climber says, another great video. For vices, he picked up an Irwin 5-inch vise that swivels and rotates on Amazon for about 80 bucks. Seems to be pretty nice. Haven't had a chance to use it much. Has a pretty good rating. He says there is one guy who snapped his in too. If you break a vise like that, I gotta wonder, what in the world were you doing to break something like that? They're usually pretty beefy. Maybe he needed a bigger one for whatever it was he was. He says, well, considering buying a big hefty used one off Craigslist, but the Irwin had a warranty. Well, that's something to consider. Thanks for the recommendation. Frank Lyle makes another comment. He says, cool having rewired the lighting in my kitchen and 2 baths. I agree it pays to plan it all out in advance. Same goes for when I had the sub panel set for the wood shop, had every 230 volt location determined. Let's see, before the electrician arrived. He says he did the same thing for his dust collector in the wood shop that I did for the compressor. Since the collector is in the garage outside the shop, I wanted to control it with a simple switch. In regards to a plug-in setup for your compressor, he says it's less than ideal according to his electrician. He has a radiant heater, 230 volt running 13 amps mounted on the wall in the garage, and it's just plugged into the wall with a heavy duty 10 gauge cord drop. I discussed it with the electrician and he said it would have been likely been fine as the compressor, my compressor has been fine for several years, but he recommended that I check the plug periodically while the heater is running to make sure the plug and plate were not heating up. He said it's more of a concern with the possible resistance in the plug receptacle generating enough heat to melt something. Thanks for the info on the ductless split. I plan to use one of my basement hobby room for in my future house. Glad it works like I would need for that application. Frank, thanks for the comment. The next time I run the compressor for a while, I'll actually, once it shuts off, I'll reach in there and take a check on that big plug to see if it's heating up at all. Let's see, Bob P, he says, your electrician sounds like our septic tank guy. He couldn't believe we wanted the grass put back on top when the hole was filled in. I dug the hole because I didn't want them making a mess, but they did anyway. Good job thinking out your electricals. Thanks for that, Bob. And yeah, sometimes the contractors can be interesting. Fast Man says, very analytical about how you set up your garage. If you could do anything different now that you've had it a while, what would you change or do different? There's not a whole lot. I had a lot of time to think about this before I built it. It was a kind of a 5-year plan. I made notes and asked people, and I kept up with all of that. When it came time to build it, I did the drawings like you saw. One thing that I can think of, our dogs sometimes let them out in the back at night, and I have security lights that come on, motion sense floodlights on the corners of the house. And I thought that the one on the corner of the house would illuminate the backyard still good enough after the shop was built, so I did not have the electricians run any CAN access type ports on the back of the shop that I could put floodlights in. If I had it to do all over again, I would have at least put one on one of the corners so that I had a little bit of extra lighting in the backyard. That is one thing I can for sure say I would have done different. And probably, I've mentioned this a couple of times, something to get things into the attic more easily than trying to climb up that very tall attic ladder. And I'll show you that in a future video, how that attic ladder looks and what the attic looks like. I'm gonna have to solve that. Thanks for everybody who's leaving me comments about the little lifts and whatnot that you can get to put in the attic. I'm definitely gonna have to look into one of those. Maurice Austin, thank you for taking the time to create these videos. I'm having a 30 by 40 pole barn garage built in April. I've taken your advice on soundproofing the compressor room, which will also be my full bathroom and panel room. I have a friend that will be doing my electrical, but after watching this video, I believe I will be coming up with a plan for electrical like you demonstrated. My question is, you seem to have thought of everything, but if you had to do it again, what would you change? So I just mentioned that. That's the answer. I would have put some security lighting in the back and maybe left some little areas for security cameras. As are becoming less expensive now, you can get a whole security camera system for pretty reasonably priced, and they'll feed back to a cloud provider where you can actually do all your storage. So I would have thought more about some more external eave. I did the front, but I didn't do anything in the back. So that's really all I would have changed. That's all the comments from last week. So let's get talking about this week's video. So by now we were getting into what I would consider middle fall. It was about the middle of October. So remember those delays that we had on the front end of the project. They were now starting to catch up to me. And I'm calling this out so that if you're having a shop built, you can really keep an eye on that and maybe start a little bit sooner than I did. I thought by starting in the summertime, we started in July, I thought that by September, we would probably be wrapping things up, and for sure by the middle of October, they would be doing the finishing touches. But we were about, a month, maybe 60 days behind because of the two delays that we had. One with the city, which I mentioned in the first or second video, and then I've mentioned a couple of times during demolition, the builder had some construction equipment challenges. They had a couple of parts they had to order for a piece of broken equipment that took a while to get here. So that was starting to push in. I wasn't worried yet because it was still reasonably warm out. You know, middle October in southern Middle Tennessee, we're 60 degrees, 70 degrees during the day, but it was getting down to like 40 at night. And so I was getting a little bit worried about how that might impact things like the mud for the sheetrock and paint especially. And so we were getting a little bit later in the year. Now, the brick package was delivered. I'll show you that there. So there's the brick package. It included a bunch of mortar and sand and things like that. So all that has to be delivered. They staged it out back behind the shop, as you can see. And so the brick guys were starting to come in. And now what I was starting to run into is a lot of different contractors were coming in each day. And each contractor would come in with only his thing in mind. Plumbing contractor's thinking about plumbing. He's not thinking about sheetrock or insulation or anything like that. So I was real careful to come back behind them after they did their work, and I was trying to think 2 steps ahead. Okay, now that the plumbing's in place, there wasn't much of it, thank goodness, but now that it was in place, how was that going to impact any insulation or anything I need to worry about with the PEX pipes that were running the wall? And so I'll show you that now for plumbing. Remember we had the little grinder pump, talked about that before. That was for the toilet, and you can see the water piping coming in for that, and that runs back over to the house. And then we had water pipes come in from the bottom there, and it was PEX. So we had a hot and a cold, and that's for the sink, as well as the shop, spigot that I wanted mounted to the wall. And so I'll show you that too. So there's a red and a blue PEX that came up. 2 of them went across to the sink, so they come through the wall. You can see that down there, as well as a drain for the sink, goes back over to the grinder pump. And then the other 2 pipes go up and into the wall, and they actually run down the wall. And so those PEX pipes run down the wall to that spigot right there. And I wanted that installed so that, and I had to go find this, and this is something I ordered myself. I think it was about 90 bucks. I got it from a restaurant supply place, but I wanted one that had a threaded end on it for a garden hose, so that if I want to just hook up a garden hose to it and wash the car in here or something, I could do that. But I've used this a ton for the mop bucket and things like that. So keep that in mind, something outside of just the sink. You might actually want a shop faucet like that to do some work with. Now, one thing I had to also consider is that those PEX lines run literally against the outside wall. So they got insulation around them because the insulation came in and went on top of them, but they're just in that cavity, and they basically drilled through all the 2x6s to make room for those PEX pipes to run through. And PEX is just that red and blue plastic. It's got a pretty high burst strength, so if it freezes, it's supposed to be able to resist some of that, but I didn't want to take any chances. So the other thing we did, and hopefully you can see that, we put valves on each of the water lines right down there close to the concrete. And I'm not talking about this valve for the toilet. I'm talking about the one down there, and you can actually shut the water off. And so if it's ever going to get really, really cold, I just go ahead and shut the water off, and then I crack the faucet open here just to make sure we don't have any issues with the water lines in the wall, because that'd be a great big mess. And I don't want to have to run the heat all the time out here anyway. So for example, it's been really cold the past few days, and we've talked about the thickness of the wall and the 6-inch studs. And you can see now it's 52 degrees in here. And it's probably been, the high might have been 30 today, maybe 35. It's been cloudy and rainy, so there hasn't been any sun. So the shop will stay, I think the coldest I've ever seen it get in here is about 42 degrees maybe, and that was on a really several nights of cold weather. And so that extra insulation is paying off, and we'll talk about that in the future. But that was what I was thinking about for the water and the plumbing. And so spigot, PEX, shutoffs. So keep that in mind when you're putting yours in. And right behind the plumbing, the trim contractor came in, and they installed the windows. They installed the man door, so that got put in. And they did the trim on the outside eaves and all of that. I'll show you some of that there. You can see how they set the trim up, and they started to kind of make the roof look like it was coming together with the angles around the eaves. And you could kind of start to see the architecture was going to match the house, and things were starting to now move along pretty good. And obviously when they were putting the windows in, I did, while they were here, before they left, came in and made sure they all went up and down nice and smooth. You don't want one to be off a little bit and they have to make another trip back. So I made sure they would go all the way up and all the way down. Everything felt just right, and they did. I made sure they put the screens in. I've actually heard of people having trouble with that, where they put the windows in and for whatever reason the contractor forgets to do the screens, and then they can't find them because the window was a specific size. And so check all of that out too when you get your windows and stuff like that put in. And also check your door. Make sure that it seals up. I would come in here and at night, or I'm sorry, during the day, shut the lights off, and I would look for any bright areas of light. Now you might see a little bit and it won't be that big of a deal, and you want to make sure that the locks at least look like they're going to line up. The hole in the door at least looks like it's going to line up with the keyway in the trim, and make sure all of that looks like it's right before they get too far gone, and you can have them come right back if there's a problem, or even catch them while they're here if you're lucky enough to do that. And in my case, I had them use what are they called, bronze, I think, oil rub bronze colored knobs and locks and hinges. Now don't be too surprised if when the door is first installed, it's just whatever generic hinge happened to come on it. The finishers, kind of what I call them, that come back and do this kind of stuff, actually swap these out at a later date. So when the door originally went in, it was just the regular hinge that came on it. So don't be too concerned if you see that, but just keep an eye on it when they actually do come back and do your doorknobs and your locks, that they do make these match if they were supposed to. And this is also when I had the air conditioning contractor come out and run the line set for the mini split. I've talked about the mini split a little bit before, but originally we had intended to use one of the through the wall units like you would see at a hotel. That's what I used over in the attached garage. But a buddy of mine, Kevin, does heating and air for a living, and I reached out to him and I said, hey man, should I be considering something different? And he said, you're going to be pushing the limits of what one of those T-pack, I think is what they're called, through the wall units can handle. He goes, the square footage, or the volume square footage, not just the floor, but the volume of the space, he says, is going to tax that thing. He goes, it might work okay, it might not, it might run full blast all the time and wear it out quicker, and it's going to be noisier. And he says, if you can upgrade to a mini split, he says you can do it for not much more money and you'll be miles ahead. And the way he described it, he says you can heat it with a match and cool it with an ice cube. And that's pretty much the way the thing works. We flip it on, and in 10-15 minutes it would have this room about 70 degrees, going from the 50 that it is right now. And in the summertime, when it's really hot, it's humid here in the summertime as well. It's not unusual for it to be 90, 95 degrees in July and 70 to 80% humidity. It's actually got modes where you can just use the remote and just tell it, hey, I just want it to do dehumidifier or whatever, and it'll take the humidity out of the room. It does make it feel cooler because it's lowered the humidity, but it's not actually running the AC. And then you can actually just tell it just to run the AC if you just want it to cool everything off. So they had to come in and they basically boarded up the hole they had put for the through the wall, which wasn't any big deal. And the builder, for whatever reason, wanted a silly price to put one of those in. And so I told them just to refund me or credit me what they were going to charge me for the through the wall, and I would take that and hire my own AC contractor, which I did, another company that specialized in these, and I had them come out and install it. And they asked me if I wanted the line set, which is what that's called. I'll show you a picture of it there. Did I want it run in the wall or on the outside of the wall? And they said it was really a 50-50 for their customers. I really didn't want to see it, so I told them, you know, if it doesn't have very many problems, or there's not typically problems with those line sets, let's put it in the wall. And luckily we haven't ever had a problem. If we ever did, the challenge or the downside of that would be they would have to cut the sheetrock to fix it. But the other option is to run it on the outside of the wall, and then you would see like the little cover that they would put over it. But if there was ever a problem, they could just pop the cover off and fix it. The guy told me these things are pretty reliable, and it's a Mitsubishi Mr. Slim, and I don't get any money for advertising for them. I'm just telling you it worked pretty well. It's worked pretty well for me. So it's a Mitsubishi Mr. Slim unit. It's got a pretty nice remote. I'll show you that. So there's the remote. It's got all the hold it up a little bit closer, maybe you can see it. It's got all the options on there that you can select to run it. Mode, it's got echo, the fan speed and all that. I usually set it to auto and just tell it what temperature I want it to be, and it'll run itself, either heat or cool, and it'll kind of do its thing. You can even have it timed to come on and off at certain times and things like that. So, and I put the remote down here by the door so that when I'm leaving, I can just turn around and beep, turn it off. And then the remote goes right there back on the wall next to the alarm system. But yeah, so they ran the line set, as you can see. You want to do all of that stuff before your insulation goes in, so that everything's where it's going to be. And then when the insulation comes in, they don't have to come in and tear through it or mess it up, messing around with the insulation to put something else in that was forgotten or missed. And there you can see they came in and installed the brick, and they did the nice little detail, just like they did on the house on the corners. I don't know what that's called. It's got like the little section that sticks out there. You can see that. And so they did everything to match the house, including around the windows. They did the nice little keystones and all of that. So all the detail matched the house, just like a little mini version of the house. And on this particular one, the mortar is charcoal mortar as well. It's a little bit darker than your regular mortar. It's actually a black charcoal color, which goes well with the color of the brick. And that also had to match the house. And those were HOA requirements. I would have done that anyway, even if it wasn't an HOA requirement. And one thing I will say is the HOA only required brick on the front. They said on a detached structure you could actually use siding on the sides and the back. I chose not to do that, and I bricked the whole thing. It costs a little bit more, but in the long run I think it was worth it. I'm not gonna have to worry about the siding getting that moss or mildew on it or whatever that stuff's called. The brick is held up really nicely. It looks great, just like the day it went in, just like the house does, as a matter of fact. And so I bricked the entire thing. It was probably, I don't remember the exact amount. Let's say it was $2,000 more to have it bricked versus just doing vinyl siding, and it was worth it to me just to use all brick. I didn't let them do any vinyl siding on the house either when they built it, even though one section of it was supposed to have vinyl siding. I had them change that to brick as well. So that's probably a good stopping place for this week. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Be sure to give it a thumbs up if you did. That helps me get those out there into YouTube land and helps the channel grow. I appreciate you guys that do that. Be sure to check us out on Instagram. It's @Speedys_garage, as well as our website, www.speedysgarage.net. Be sure to tune in next week. I don't know if we're going to do a tool review or something on the car or more shop stuff, but we'll definitely have a video again next week, and I will be seeing you out there.